November 17th, 2005. Two people are driving from Knoxville to Asheville. I obviously am one. And there is the other, driving in a brand new Ford Focus. We are going there because my brother, Mark and Jack, and their wives are meeting, and they wanted us to come up and be with them. And so I'm looking forward to that, and looking forward to John perhaps taping my two brothers and I as we talk about our mother and dad. And I'm sure that any grandchildren or great-grandchildren would be happy to know something about their roots. And that's one of the reasons we're going to do it. We're on our, just past Newport. We're coming into the mountains, and I've seen this mountain many times just before we go through the gap, and I've thought to myself that this mountain is a lot like the mountains you see on the in the cartoons. It goes straight up and then straight down, usually with a dog patch style, a little snow cap on it. At any rate, there are not very many views that you see like that around East Tennessee. What you usually see is a long stretch of ridge, which this really is, only you're looking at it from the butt side. And over here, one of the most beautiful pictures, or one of the views rather, in Tennessee, of going through a gap into the Smoky Mountains. Here we are coming into the top of the mountain, North Carolina rest stop. Very lovely place. Don't ask me why, I'm just interested. You had that engine trouble.
With that car that had the...
Then of course, Harry had the farm hour on WWNC, and I'd go down there every now and then to read a script for the veterinarians. And those guys that haul those instruments up there, they'd been out at some gig in Beulah or somewhere, and they'd come in dragging the bass and the fiddles and everything, and then they'd set up and play, and
They call them the Dirty Five. That wasn't their name.
had live music there.
What did they call it? What'd they call them? Dirty Five? What?
Well, there was a Friendly Five that,
Filthy Five.
here's
Friendly
Harry, you know,
Five.
and
Friendly Five.
Harry called them the Filthy Five. Then they had Stoney Cooper and the Clinch Mountain Boys. But that was a sight to, I think back on it now, is to see those guys drag all those things up there for that, just for maybe 10, 15 minutes, but that gave them a lot of publicity for picking up other
Jobs.
jobs.
Big jobs.
You wanna go down and greet Harry, or you wait for him to come to the door?
Is he coming? Did you see
Yeah,
him?
he came in.
Wait till he comes up.
Let's move this.
At least I don't mind going down.
Somebody better go to the
Someone's
door.
ought to go down.
We left that for you, Donna. You don't have enough to do as it
I haven't
is.
done anything today. Get out.
Did we take some apples too?
As I recall, we did, but then we were afraid the horses were gonna founder because they just kept eating. And finally got them out of that place.
Now, I don't remember that, but it sounds like that's a nice mild story. We didn't do anything worse, I hope.
Yeah. No, I don't think we did. Don't know whether we thought about anything worse or not, because we didn't do anything worse.
And that guy over there was throwing 100-pound sacks of turkey feed around like they were baseballs.
You're not wrong.
Can't do it anymore, I'll bet.
That was some turkey operation you guys had out there. I remember turkeys in there wired in. Well, other horse memory, Mark and I went out riding one day, and I guess Old Bess was the liveliest one of the two. Was Jim, I think, my Bess was.
Yeah.
It had been ridden in a while, and boy, I felt like a cowboy, and I go, give her her head. She went left, and I kept going straight ahead. Can't do that to me, so I mount that sucker again. Same thing.
Oh, no.
You did, you went back on.
Went back on. and
Very
got-
good.
And got back on.
Got back up.
They didn't.
Well, they say that's what you should do,
Yeah, I know.
unless
I
you
tell
have a
you.
broken leg or something.
No, I just had a bruised bottom, no broken.
Wow.
Good old days.
Well, I'll tell you, I sure remember the stories about all the wonderful dinners at
Oh,
your
it's
mother's
great.
table.
Great Thanksgiving and
Great
Christmas dinners.
Thanksgiving.
Without question.
Sure remember hearing those stories.
Happy memories.
Yeah.
You remember how long that table was? You
Oh,
put
yeah.
all of the
You've got
leaves
it.
in
You
it?
should know how long we had it stretched out when we were there in May.
I remember one of the Thanksgivings very vividly, and I was helping her in the kitchen and the table setting and whatever, and that table just kept getting longer and longer, and that was just amazing to
We
me.
had one Christmas out there where we had a power failure.
That's
And we
right.
had to, your mother pulled out this big iron coffee pot and figured some way to swing it on top of the fireplace.
Fireplace, wow.
We ate coffee and cookies till about 5:35, 6 in the afternoon when the power came back.
Well, Harry, you know, I do believe the first Thanksgiving, after we were married, the first Thanksgiving we were up here, I think we were at your mother and dad's,
Like we were.
your mother and dad's
Oh,
house
say.
for Thanksgiving.
Ah.
I'm sure we were.
That was 53 years.
That would-
Yeah, so that would have been in
Huh.
1952.
So how long you been retired now from UT, Tom?
21 years.
21 years.
Just think,
I've been retired now for 15 years.
And I've never regretted a day. I retired at 59 and a half. Yeah. But I can't, I've been busy all the time, but I can't tell you what I did yesterday.
That's
Well, I
par
was
for the
busy.
course.
Yeah, you feel busy, of course.
sounds normal, doesn't it?
Right, yeah, I think a lot of us can make the same identical statement, Tom.
Because I perfected the fine art of doing nothing and feeling very good about it.
Okay. That's lifelong learning there, that's good. Wow.
Your diploma you put up on the dashboard? You've heard of it, Tom? You put up on the dashboard so you could handicap park.
Pretty good, Mark.
Ironside, but he broke horses up there. That's where he got his nose broken.
Is that right?
They were out racing
Thrown
on
off too,
Sunday
Harry.
afternoon or something, and he
Looks
got
like
kicked in the face.
he got thrown off the horses.
Yeah.
Thrown off the horse and his
Kicked,
And
he
the
was kicked.
foot stuck in the saddle, in the stirrup, and he dragged along.
Oh, my.
Wow.
He had to be a
Anyway,
pretty tough cookie,
But he,
which he was. Which he was.
Scotty, they call him.
Yes.
is Maggie worked for the Ironsides in that inn at Push Switch. Jim took us all around up there one day, and then we saw the Ironsides markers in the cemetery, and but Maggie had to work off her trip by working for the Ironsides, and then I guess she met Charlie, and they started farming.
Like she was almost an indentured servant.
Mhm,
Yeah.
she
In a
was.
way, yeah.
That's
Then
what they would do.
Couple.
Well, she came to work in the inn there at Puslich, the inn was just across from the railway track. We got the,
And then Mr. Ironside was responsible for Dad's being converted, wasn't he? Almost
Now,
sure.
you're talking about the old evangelist?
no, I don't think so,
You're not
Tom.
talking about that one.
That was not, no, that's not the
He
old
probably
guy.
had
You're
some
talking about the
influence
old
because he
Harry-
had,
Harry
Well,
Ironside.
anyway, that's my recollection. And then he went, whatever made him go down to Minneapolis, I'm rather glad he did.
Neat, wasn't
And
it?
was,
he went out to Saskatchewan
Good thing he went to
Right.
Minneapolis.
and about 1912 and lived in.
These guys.
He and Walter Purcell and George Maslin
Forget about
lived in a
that.
tent in Saskatoon in the winter 1912,
Way below zero.
13.
Some years ago, we took a train trip across.
Had a tent that was a frame tent, and they had a stove in it, but
Saskatchewan.
you can imagine living in a tent in that climate. Phew.
In wintertime.
Beautiful country.
And he sold meat to the, for Gordon Ironside and Fairs. And
okay,
we got a picture of him driving his
yeah.
team in the wagon, and but he sold a lot of stuff to the railway commissaries.
Holding the reins and looking so sober. That was quite unlike him, yeah. And then,
But it was
and then
that,
was Harold Harper or somebody that had meetings down there in Longfellow or some, no, near the what lake? What, there was another assembly down there.
but Dad, he immigrated from Canada to the States. I think he had in mind that he could get his citizenship by joining the Army, although he didn't go to the Army right away. But he went down and I think he looked for work as far south as Chicago, and then came back to Minneapolis and worked for DeSoto.
See, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
I remember the suit he was wearing the day he walked into the West Asheville Gospel Chapel up on Hanover.
Yeah.
One of the first time I ever laid eyes on him. And he came in light, almost a bright blue suit, blue vest. You
Yeah.
talk about getting around talking about your memories. I did something, I guess 6 years ago now, which was an interesting thing. Found some little notebooks my father had done. Just, no, not stream of consciousness, no insight into his mind, just what he did on a given day. For instance, one entry was 2 o'clock this afternoon, married Annie Alley. But based on what I'd heard, I put together a little, yeah, probably 25, 30 page
Wow.
narrative of my mother's life.
Wow. You include that in it?
Oh, I did.
Yeah, by the way, 2 o'clock, I
did.
got married.
Yeah, incidentally, this
That's pretty
is
good.
what I did at 2 o'clock today.
Had a pretty
I
good
got
sense of
married.
humor, you know, the first 3 kids were girls, you know. And I got a copy of a letter he wrote to his foster parents, saying, well, when I was born, I had another girl, but this one's a little different, so we named it Harry.
I can still see Lily driving up in the car and all the Lannings getting out. You remember that song, Harry? She's the lily of the Lannings?
Not very kind, Jack. Not one of Mark's in my kind
The Lord will
of
forgive you guys.
Was Mark a part of that one?
Oh, he
Of
was.
course.
Yeah, there was a lot of forgiveness needed back then.
The lily of the valley, the one who drives the car.
And Mr. Bedell, how are you tonight? Not so well. I was the weakest of 7 children.
I'll tell you, if you ask him how he was, he would tell you a whole lot more than you wanted to
Oh,
know.
weren't they bad? I know.
I forgot about
Have
that.
they straightened out yet, do they?
We know there's,
They have to
there,
keep their
every
sense
time I
of
go to-
humor, Donna.
Lowe's Hardware, I think of
Don't
Carol,
expect
Frank,
it
and
ever
Harold.
to change.
and how the folks used to bring them to Sunday school, and here he ends up, I don't know, is he manager of one of the Lowe's Hardwares, or,
Yeah, I think the Lowe's, I believe.
it was just amazing to think, you know, that how good this was for him to have, you know, to have been exposed to the kind of discipline. And all he had was his grandfather raising him, was that it?
Uncle,
Harold, uncle.
Now, who was that, Harold?
Harold and
Harold
Daryl
and Daryl
Franks.
Franks, 2 doors down from the chapel.
Oh, yeah, no,
Mhm.
yeah, just
Mhm.
barely
But
kicked.
Daryl became a manager of the Lowe's store. He was manager, well, he was in Lowe's store, then he became the manager here, and then they put him down at Hendersonville. But he died a couple years ago.
Oh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is-
And then his brother Harold, well, I talked to Daryl's wife, and she said, well, he just wouldn't be able to come. He's a real alcoholic and was incapacitated.
I'm sorry. Well, he was, Harold was not, anyway, no, let's not talk about people. He wasn't as bright as Daryl, but
No, he wasn't.
He wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. Had a lot to be humble about.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Well, we need to be getting on the way, let these people come make their plans for lunch and some take home to Eunice, and then we get down the road too.
So tell me about, tell me about Lois,
She's in Statesville,
Statesville.
and she has a son and grandchild in California, just the one child.
Southern California.
And,
yeah.
and Irving
Southern
is still
What does their son do? He's a chemist of some kind.
He's a, sort of, he's got a PhD.
Yeah.
It's a biology, I don't think it's biology, from Harvard. But he's with the space program, I think, analyzing the biological impact of being in space or whatever.
Wow.
Something rather esoteric to my somewhat non-engineering mind.
So Lois is in good health, I hope?
Oh, fair health. I wouldn't call it good, I would call it
Well, say a
fair
word
at
or
best.
She was
For me,
in the
you can see it.
hospital,
She's
was
had
it
a lot of
last
problems,
Christmas?
a lot of health problems.
Heart trouble or
Last Christmas?
Was she,
I don't-
And she has some very serious foot problems, which make it difficult for her to interfere. Fair, say she's in fair health would be a bit of an exaggeration.
Yeah. Farmer Varner, yeah,
there you go.
that's it.
Just- I left that life behind
You
long.
left that life. Was it? Well, do you have any films, reminiscent films that show you,
No, I don't.
in your
Matter of
glory?
fact, We weren't in television those days, and I really don't have any recording. I got some pictures. Some pictures showing a very young, skinny man with a lot of curly hair, horn-rimmed glasses.
I was just telling the folks about when you were, I guess it was WISE or something at the Landgren, and you had a spot for Barefoot and Tatum, and you took your shoe off, and whoever was reading the spot just broke
That was
up.
Jimmy Patterson. We couldn't get him to break up. The guy took her away from him. But,
Yeah, and
that's another story.
I probably wrote that.
well, I hope you haven't changed
That's
too much.
that's where we met.
Well, a lot of people are sorry I haven't.
Wow.
You become more sedate.
Not really. Not really. Only when it's required. You do what the moment demands, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been in the moment of the man being sedate all the time.
Well, I sure, speaking so much of your father.
Another time, I think we were down on Broadway with you and Mark
Don
and
and I were talking,
we went to some
he's just a
store.
person
She's talking
that
about
made
that.
such, he just made such an impression, and you just never forget him. I can just picture him so well in my mind today, the first time I ever saw him, and so many times at your house, and even when your mother was in the nursing home, we would go over and visit with your dad. In fact, I remember one night we went after, I guess it was after the meeting or something, I
Now,
don't
what we
remember,
did
but he
was-
had a box of chocolate
He did.
candy.
It's like the
Oh,
kitchen
he was so
table.
generous with it, he just insisted that we kept eating this box of chocolates.
Doesn't sound like a Scotchman to me.
Well,
He
we were
didn't act
staying
like
at
one
a-
that
no,
night.
he didn't.
But he
We stayed
just
in a
had so
hotel out in
much,
West Asheville.
so much
I
humor
think we
and
dropped by and picked over.
personality. He
took
was,
a meeting that night
oh,
or
he
something.
was,
He just
he
blew
was,
you away.
Stopped
too,
inside
like-
that kitchen
like-
table.
Not like a
You know, you're-
he was
That's
just,
why she lived out on
he
the
just,
camp.
was a unique,
Remember one time
really unique individual.
we gave Mom a gift of money, and we didn't know what to give her, so we gave her some money. And, now Mom, we don't want you just paying the gas bill or whatever it is, do something, and she said, well, we do need a new toilet seat.
Practical lady.
Oh, I tell you, we laughed over that for months on end.
Well, she could have had some fun if she wanted. You know, my kids gave her for Christmas last year. About what? A toilet seat.
And she was just as serious as she could be. She wasn't joking.
Well,
Practical lady.
Well,
My father
we have
told-
a lot of good memories of her too.
Oh, great.
my father told
Wonderful,
Scottish jokes,
wonderful
but this
people.
is the joke I remember the most. Agnes and Sandy were up in the moors of Scotland, and it was a dark and stormy night.
So like
And she ran out of a very important medicine, and he was obliged to go down, you know, miles through the moors to the apothecary to get medicine. And so he was very important because she needed that. And so his last words to her before he left says, "Agnes," and she says, "Yes, Sandy. Would you do me a favor?" "Yes, Sandy, what is that?" "If you feel yourself slipping away, would you mind blowing out the candle?"
Oh dear.
Now, that is the Scottish joke supreme.
I'll tell you a Scottish joke you can take.
Scottish people.
Particularly nice for Presbyterians. A kid in my Sunday school class at the North Atlanta Bible Chapel told me this, probably 40 years ago. Boy, have I got mileage out of this.
Oh, has he ever gotten mileage out?
There was an old Scotsman
It is fun.
who had a parish in New England, great preacher of the word, but one besetting sin, an abiding hatred of the English and all things English. As he got older, he just couldn't keep this out of his sermons. And a lot of the people in the congregation had dated their people back to the mother country. So they called him in and said, "Dr. McTavish, I think we're going to have to relieve you of your preaching duties." They loved it. He said, "No, I promise. I will never say anything detrimental about the English again. That's my commitment. All right, one more chance." Well, they're hanging from the rafters in church. A word got around. He chose as his subject the Lord's Supper. He said, "The Lord said, one of you will betray me." And John said, "'Tis it I, Lord." Go. Peter said, "'Tis it I, Lord." And Judas said, "I say, Governor, it ain't me, is it?"
Very good. Gotta remember that one.
I've told,
He didn't say it.
you wouldn't believe the mileage at sales meetings I've got.
He didn't say it.
He never said anything bad about the English. The object is, the lesson is, it ain't what you say, it's the way you say it. Honey, we're gonna have to run along. This has been terrific, Tom.
Yeah, it's so good to see you.
Quite a while. He was at mother and dad's wedding. He was about 7 years old. He remembered that.
Now, where's Mark? Mark was doing something. Okay.
You looking for Mark?
Let's see. Well, not northeast, it's over by Lake Como or something.
There's a certain amount we can get off of maps and old records. Like Uncle Jack said, it's coming on a printout.
There wasn't any in the time that we were there.
Well,
There-
Harold Harper was holding services there when Dad and Mom met, is what I understood.
Well, I thought they got acquainted with it down at that Minnehaha Sunday
And
School.
that's the one. Minnehaha, that's near Lake Como, isn't it?
No, that, Como is way up in St. Paul, near the,
What's lake am I thinking of?
near the farm campus. The,
Uncle
well, that's, the Longfellow Hall was involved in the Sunday school down at Minnehaha,
Yeah.
and, they
Uncle
got
Mark?
recruited teachers.
Could you scoot over just a little?
This way.
Yeah, so we can see everybody in the same picture.
Come on over here, Jack, a little bit.
You can see right here what the camera's gonna see. It's just the three of you. It looks real good.
Hi, Dad.
It's just a little cut marks getting
Yeah.
covered up by the sunshine here. Now, you're welcome. We're gonna talk about your mom and your dad, and I will ask questions that I don't know the answer to, and you may not know the answer to either, but it's just to hopefully think of some details you haven't thought about before. So some of the great-grandkids will know a little bit more about your parents. First question I'd ask is their names, and if you know anything at all about how their names were chosen, middle name, first name, any stories at all, that'd be a good place to start.
Well, Tom was named for a favorite preacher, Dad's Tom Baird, and, I don't know where my name came from, but the middle name means belonging to God, Lael, and I think it's Numbers 23:19, and that's about all I know about that. And then Grandpa's name was Alexander Innes, and I don't know where the mark came from, other than it was short and to the point.
Any idea who your dad was named after? Were there any other
No.
James Inneses before
I
him?
have no idea. I think they ran out of names. There was 13.
He was the youngest of 13. Pretty good sized family.
13 Inneses, and they were from,
New Deer, Scotland.
Yeah, all his cousins.
And that may have, Dad and Maggie may have been from a second marriage.
Yeah.
The other ones that were older were from another marriage.
and just to follow the thread, he grew up in Scotland, and do you know any incidents or episodes from his young days in Scotland?
Well, I know that he was, I think it was about 10 years old, that he was farmed out to another family, as his family were so poor that they really couldn't support him. And this other family was pretty well off and didn't have any children, and he went to live with them. And part of his chores, you might say, for them were taking produce into town and sell it. So he got some sales experience real young. I think if I remember right, it was about 4 miles that he had to go to peddle that produce, eggs and what have you.
And he used to talk about going out and digging peat, which was this half-formed coal, and they had to dry it out in stacks, and it was very hard work and very heavy. And I remember him talking about that, how hard it was to through childhood. And he remembered his mother had a favorite expression, waste not, want not, that they were very frugal, and they had to be. So that was an expression, waste not, want not, that was rather meaningful to me. I'd still do it today.
But as far as growing up, he said that the people there, their occupation was fishing, farming, and fighting. And they, of course, used to go down to the pub or tavern or what have you. And then when Grandpa became Christian, and they couldn't understand why he didn't go to the pub and that anymore. And some misunderstanding there. I don't know just what the result of that was.
He was about 18 years old, I guess, when he came to this country, or Canada, I guess is where he immigrated to. And he had to have, I believe it was $50, which he borrowed from somebody. And as soon as he got off the boat, he just wired back. And that was it. And then he worked as a conductor or a motorman on,
Toronto streetcar, wasn't it?
yeah, I think it was.
Toronto streetcar?
I don't know where it was, but I remember him saying something about, I don't think it's Toronto.
Well, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Probably horse-drawn.
Could be.
By that, because I assume we're talking about the first decade of the 1900s, by his age. He was 18.
He got into the Army of the United States and I know he told us some things at the areas where they fought, but he was a Canadian turned U.S. citizen.
And he never did fight, but he was considered very valuable by the officer in charge because he was good for the morale. He knew how to do light banter talk, and it was so valuable that the officer said, you don't have to have any regular duties, you go around and cheer the troops up. It was very, that's rather typical of how he was.
I think he said that the only thing that the guys liked on the ship were his meetings.
Oh. Now, as far as his father was concerned, our great-grandfather, our grandfather rather, he was a fisherman, and at certain times of the year, there would be runs of herring out in the sea, and everybody had to leave their farm, and not everybody, but go out and man the boats to help catch the herring that was at that just running by in a few weeks' time. And also he used to go to the bar rooms and fight, bare knuckle fight, which was entertainment for the rough Irish, rough Scotch farmers. That didn't sound very appealing to me, but I do remember Dad saying that.
But Dad was always interested in fighting. He'd look at he'd listen to the boxing matches of Joe Louis and Dempsey and all those guys. He was real. That was one thing he really liked to do.
So he followed professional boxing once he got here? Or you just remember him following it?
He used to
little
say,
bit.
shake the hand that shook the hand of John L. Sullivan. He evidently shook hands with one of these famous fighters, and he was very interested, you're right.
So let's pause for a moment regarding him and turn to your mom. Do you know anything, any memories about her early years as a child, as a younger lady basically before she met your dad?
She taught,
Where was she born?
where was she born?
She was born in Minneapolis.
You know,
Was she?
and she went to South High, and
You mean West High, don't you?
no, South High. I've got the papers, and there weren't too many in her graduating class. I
3 or 4.
There were, but she was in the honor roll, and then from there, she went to what notably St. Cloud State Teachers College. I don't know where I got that just recently. But that may be
That's better, Mike.
the connection that got her up to Hinckley to teach. But she taught school at Hinckley, Minnesota, after her, you might say, normal training, they called it back then. And but I always, up until just recently, I thought it was Winona State teachers, and but something that I got that made me think it was possibly that she finished it at St. Cloud. And then she lived with a Finnish family at Hinckley, and I remember her saying that they made awful strong coffee. And we have some pictures of that part of her life. And she was active in what they call Christian Endeavor, and one of the teachers in that and in the Christian Endeavor was Robert Ledoux, and his son became a veterinarian and was practiced here. He's still living, he lives up at Weaverville, and but then Robert, the one that Mother knew, he went apparently took him to Cleveland city schools, and he was over the manual training in the Cleveland schools for a good number of years.
So she went to school, high school, and began teaching, or she went?
And then to Teachers College.
University,
I
okay.
think she was on a valedictorian in her class. I
I
think.
have some little slacks for the
Yeah, well, I don't know what her status was, but then she, from Hinckley, she went down to the Twin Cities to teach, and if I remember right, it was Emerson School, but she did sort of special education.
Right.
They didn't call it that then, but it was, they'd give her the hard ones to work with.
And that was very important. I recall, for example, when I was very small, even before I could recognize many words, she would have flashcards. I remember in the front bedroom, and she would have flashcards which would give the prefix, and then you read suffix like fruit, and then fruitful, or back. I can't recall right now, but I remember she was teaching at a very young age, grammar and spelling and the ends of words, adding on to the ends of a root word. And I do recall Aunt Amanda telling us that when she was young, she had what's called then St. Vitus dance, which was a nervous tic. And I don't know what happened, but we never did notice anything about that, but it was a sign that she had just a very mild nervous condition. But evidently she outgrew it.
And excuse me for jumping around a little bit, but what do you know about her parents?
They came over from Sweden. I don't know what year they came over from.
1876,
Right about that, yeah.
and we have, I think you have a copy of the passenger contract.
Right.
I was telling about that the grandma and grandpa and Aunt Freddie, Frederica, the three of them, it cost $109.50 to go from Sweden to Minneapolis, Minnesota. And if you read the history of that, of course they probably took the train from, they no doubt came through New York, but Ellis Island wasn't in functioning then. And but they, and I just recently, Marilyn, Donna's niece, looked up some stuff, and it gave the businesses that grandfather was involved in. It was his brother that owned the business, but then he apparently separated from his brother and then had his own business. It was making facings for fireplaces and did some kind of cabinet work. He was a skilled cabinet maker, and but he the story I got was that he had a bookkeeper working for him that embezzled funds, and he lost his business. Then he went to work for Minneapolis Sash and Door and just did routine things for them.
And you're referring to
My
your grandfather?
referring to what?
Your grandfather.
Right, right.
And you're the only one who was alive when he was alive.
No, I don't. No, he died in 1922, and I was born in 23.
But you remember him,
That must be a myth.
you remember him at the porch at
It couldn't have been.
4118,
Yeah.
rolling marbles.
Marbles through the.
And you would go pick them up.
That
But
either
you
was a
weren't
story
born
I
yet.
heard or something, because when you see 1922 is the date he was dead, and I wasn't born till 23.
Well, that's
Couldn't have been.
that kind of follows. May have been Gilbert or someone.
Yeah, but the
Anyway.
but Grandpa bought bought 3 lots out there on Nicollet Avenue. It's called Best Development or Addition or something like that, and they had if you numbered from right to left, he had the second lot, and so there was empty lot on either side of him, and then Dad bought the last lot up to the right, or up to the left, and built there after they were married. Let's see, but you want to go back to how they met. The Longfellow Gospel Chapel, or Gospel Hall at the time, was involved in the Sunday school out in the Minnehaha district, which would have been 5-6 miles south of their place, and they rented a dance hall and had Sunday school in the afternoon, and they recruited teachers from different groups, and Mother was one of them, and Dad was kind of one of the spark plugs. But that was where they met, and the parent we got some pictures of while Dad was in the service. Mother corresponded with him, and then when he got back, they were married in 1920 or 21, I guess. And of course Gilbert was born, and then I was born.
Talk about tough times. You know, Gilbert was a sick boy. The mortgage company that my folks used foreclosed on them. And I don't know if they were evicted or about to be evicted. But anyway, we were speaking and referring to the Sunday school in the afternoon at Minnehaha.
But the mortgage,
Anyway, there was a little lady that worked with them out of Minnehaha. And she said, well, I have some money, I might be able to loan you some money. And she had quite a bit of money.
that was her second cousin, grandma's second cousin,
Something like
mother,
that.
grandma's second cousin.
And
Ellen's son-in-law.
Yeah.
yeah, and so they paid off the mortgage and didn't go on living a normal life because they had a lot of responsibility. Dad's business was doing well. And Ellen's son-in-law, with the money she had, they paid off the mortgage. And I remember on Sunday evenings, quite often, we'd say, you take the envelope over to
Right.
Miss Son-in-law's,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be the check for the month. Tough times.
Now, I know you don't know all the details, but I just wanna make sure I did hear you correctly. The dances, your dad was involved in the church and sort of had some role in organizing the dances. But your mom was hired because they were hiring teachers to sort of
She
work.
volunteered to be a
Volunteer.
teacher, and, but
It's not a dance, it's a Sunday school class held in the dance
dance
area, okay, all right.
then, but from the time that Dad got to Minneapolis, which was about 1912, well, he started working for DeSoto, just as an egg canner to start with, and then he took classes at the YMCA in salesmanship and one thing, and I don't know what else, but he worked his way into the sales aspect of the business, and then later became sales manager, and then later on general manager, and
Of,
so that was.
DeSoto Creamery and Produce Company,
in Minneapolis.
Minneapolis, right?
He also made real good ice cream.
Well, that company had three divisions. At that location, they had the cold storage, and they had the produce, and then they had the ice cream. And Dad was over the produce.
And Dad was, during World War II, his division made powdered eggs for the military. I remember this great big dryer machine that would do that, and also he had a large number of women who would work and break the eggs into yolk and white, and did for the bakeries in Minneapolis.
And Donna even worked up.
Oh, did she?
And of course, that was the way of, they'd break them and put them into 30-pound cans. So they'd have yolks, and they'd have whites, and then they'd have mixed yolks and whites. And then the cold storage division, they could put them over in there and freeze them and get them out later on for the bakers and so on. That was quite a thing. But 30-pound can of egg yolks, and that was. But I think they had about 60 girls that would be doing that, and then of course they had the chicken pickers, did it by hand, and they put them on the line and then scald them, and then the girls would strip the feathers off, and then other thing that they did at DeSoto was they'd bring the chickens off the farm, they'd put them up in that top floor in what they call batteries, and they'd feed them, it was a mixture of oats and
Fatten them.
and buttermilk. And Dad said it was to get the farm out of them, get the, and improve the fat color, and make them really more saleable. They'd check the gain on, they'd put those birds in the coop, and they'd weigh them, and they'd keep track of how much gain they made. Was it Charlie Coomer that was in charge of that thing? They had a big vat they mixed the feed in.
So all this time they were living at Nicollet,
Right.
Yes,
and they lived at Nicollet pretty much until,
they moved, well, until 1941, and when they moved over to Emerson. And
so you remember the addresses, right?
I left for the university from Nicollet Avenue during final week, and then I went home to 4645 Emerson
Oh my.
in the afternoon.
I remember moving into Emerson, and one of the afternoons, I was just at the front door, and I heard that the Japanese had invaded Pearl Harbor, or bombed Pearl Harbor. And I recall that. I can see
It was the first Sunday we were in the house.
Well, that was it then. Oh, I knew there was something like that.
Lee Hum called Dad.
Oh,
Lee was one of Dad's salesmen, and he called up real excited. And we had just gotten home from church.
And did you stay in the house on Emerson until You
until I
graduated
moved.
from high school?
Well, that was 41, and then in 42, I went off to Iowa State. So fall of 42, I was only in that house for, say, 9 months or something like that myself, as far as living there. And, you all were there longer.
You left it to go to school, not to go into the service,
Right.
right?
And Armour and Company took over DeSoto Creamery and Produce and left my father jobless because they had someone else they wanted to put in. And he put in applications all over the country and people wanted him, and he chose to go to Asheville to work for the Farmers Federation, which was a farmers cooperative. And he developed the Ag and Poultry Division for that cooperative. And that's why they moved down here. That's, when I got out of the Air Force, that was my home, whereas a few years before it was in Minneapolis. I remember coming home and, what was it, Wentworth or what, anyway, that's where they rented a house is irrelevant.
Well, what, renting a house?
Yeah, no, that's not important.
No. Well, they rented a house on Winthrop Road here.
Yeah, that's it.
Then they
What
bought
is
that
it, which road?
Winthrop.
Winthrop, okay.
Then they bought the 30 acres with it was a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, not a full basement. I think they paid $6,000. And then, but it was and Mother got to taking care of some chickens out there. She had never done anything like that in her life, and she just went nuts over it, didn't she, Mark?
Raising chickens
Going out and feeding the chickens and gathering the eggs, and it was just they just had a half a dozen or something like that, but that was her first farming experience, and she really liked it.
Yeah,
And
so
Dad raised a pig, and we raised a steer, and we had a couple horses, and
Raised turkeys.
then, then Mark and Dad started that turkey project. They had a brooder house and a porch, and raised about 500.
A raised
Turkey.
wire porch. A raised wire.
That was up.
Very crude, but it did the job.
So that was, getting into the poultry was more your mom's idea than your dad's idea?
I think it's Dad.
Then in I don't know when they started negotiations, the Blue Ridge Parkway started looking at that, taking part of that property, and the end of it ended in 1952. Folks moved off of there, and so they essentially, the Blue Ridge Parkway took about half the property. It was the good half, and it was kind of interesting. The state wasn't going to pay anything until you settled. And I went down, I had to go down to Raleigh for something, and I made an appointment with the Governor Scott, and I said, that doesn't seem right, at least you could pay what you're offering, and they did change it after that, so at least you get what you're offered, and then you fight over the rest. Well, that was that much more fair.
If I could, I'd like to go back just a few years. Some of my first impressions of living at Nicollet Avenue was the wooden blocks that they paved the street with. Cedar blocks, and the horse-drawn dairy, milk wagon, and horse-drawn bakery wagon.
And ice wagon.
And ice wagon, and
Junkman.
occasional Stanley steamer would come by. And this was just simply an incredible thing. Only the rich could have one, or And then they had an electric one, electric car.
That lady
Uh,
steered it with kind of like a tiller.
Yeah, like that. And I remember getting into Essex, which is no longer built. Essex, which is a 4-door with kind of a celluloid windows and a canvas top, and the windshield wipers. The wiper, you had to reach up and move the windshield wiper with your hand, the internal handle, and that made the outside wiper go. Anyway, those were some of the early memories I had of when I was very young. That was a lot of fun to recall. You know, the ice house, we used to walk down or take a wagon and go down to the ice house 2 blocks away and get a 40-pound hunk of ice and put it in the ice box, which was like the modern day refrigerators, only the freezer on top wasn't a freezer, it's where you put the ice and the cool air went down and kept the food below cool. So we were in the ice business, some of it, along with ice skating, which was one of our favorite sports too. And I'm speaking of our mother was very brave and courageous to allow us to go across the street on Nicollet Avenue, which was a busy avenue, because we always played in the park, and she would worry about us, and she just later just learned to trust. Once Gilbert did get hit, and so did Dad, and he broke his leg, I think it was.
Yeah, he had a very bad fracture.
But my mother used to call us boys in.
Whistle.
Call us in with a whistle.
She whistled.
Yeah, with a referee whistle. And we could hear that, you know, 2 blocks away. Yeah, that was interesting.
I'm just curious, what you remember either of your parents doing for enjoyment? What they would do if they, on a Sunday afternoon or whenever they had a little extra time?
Dad liked to play golf on Saturday afternoon. We go out to Orono, which was a public course out near Minnetonka. Well, we'd take Mother out to see her sister, Aunt Amanda, and then he'd go back and he'd take us kids along, and we'd just, you can imagine golfing with kids trying. And he'd take, really, if somebody, if the preacher was visiting the house, he'd take them out and hand them a golf club and get them to play. But that gave him a lot of relaxation. And Orono was just a little better than a improved pasture at the time. But I was out there a couple of years ago in the little clubhouse where you get the drinks and everything. It had 75 years of golf on the above the door.
Wow.
And the course looked great, really. But,
We were only about 3 blocks away from Lake Harriet. Minneapolis has 13 lakes or something like that. But anyway, we did a lot of swimming. And a man gave me a kayak. And this was kind of dumb, I shouldn't even probably say it, but we decided we were gonna swim across the lake, not around it. And it would be about 1.5 miles. I figured to go straight across. And my buddy and I each had a hand on this kayak. And we went across the lake, then bought a bag of popcorn, ate it, and came back home.
Wow. But Dad also loved hunting. He would love duck hunting and pheasant hunting, and he would take us, when we got up a little teenagers, take us out to lakes up in northern Minnesota, and we'd hunt ducks and
he arranged for us to go pheasant hunting quite a bit.
pheasant hunting.
And then the
Fishing.
duck hunting.
Yeah.
And we, toward the end there, we went with Lee Hum, and
Lee
we'd go
Hum.
to that cabin, and then go to Elm Island Lake, and go out to this island and sit in the blind, and we had some pretty good shooting out there. And
I have a picture of us holding, you were on one end and I was on the other. We had 46 ducks.
Wow.
that must have been, I didn't go that year.
Oh, you weren't? I thought you were the other end. Well, I was wrong. The 46 ducks we got.
I just have to ask, did you eat a lot of duck as a result of this hunting, or was it just for
We
sport?
ate, we didn't eat all 46.
Well, Dad would get them dressed and probably give some away and one thing and another.
And what about your mom? What kind of things did she do when she got time to do it?
Well, she hooked rugs.
That's
She
right.
did hook.
Love to hook rugs.
She did a lot of handwork. We've got some things, John, that she did apparently before she married. Very fine embroidery work, very fine. It's some really good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And she loved the women's sewing circle. She'd have them at our house, and they would sew and talk and
Make quilts and
quilts, right?
she had
She
a
loved to
quilting
do
frame
that.
and,
She did have a quilting frame?
you know,
And she loved to sing when she ironed. I remember that, and I can smell when Lois comes in the morning, having put a warmer, a waist warmer, in the microwave, and she comes back and it smelled just like the ironing board
No.
that mother used to iron with. You know, you put the hot metal on the clothes, and they had that smell, and I remember that smell. And I remember her singing a lot, singing while she worked, which was
well,
a very, very, this was a,
she ironed, a lot, and she'd
Right.
have a certain day for ironing, and
right.
she had all of Dad's shirts, and then us boys, I think there's something like 13, 14 shirts, and she listened to the ball game. She liked to listen. They had good.
You said she
Halsey
followed
Hall was
baseball?
a reporter, and he'd tell about the Millers, and she loved to listen to baseball. But she'd iron for imagine all the ironing she had to do. Monday was wash day, and I don't know what day was ironing day.
Mhm.
Tuesday was ironing day.
Tuesday, okay. And when she washed, back in those days, she had one of the ringers that, and at first it was hand cranked, and then it was mechanical, or it was electric motor, and it was quite dangerous because you get your hand in there and if it kept going, so they had a safety bar that you could push in case your hand got stuck while feeding into the rollers. With a great big double sink down in the basement. I remember her washing, wringing out the clothes.
And way back, in Minneapolis, where did they hang their sheets to dry? I just have to ask. In the winter, where did they hang their laundry?
She would string up from door to door or something and put a string, a rope up, and then, the house had an odor of Fells Naphtha soap, I believe it was.
Well, Dad had some things put on the wall, and the hooks, and she hung down in the basement, and then of course she probably hung around somewhere on the outside of the house. But then another thing that we did when we were growing up was make root beer.
Yeah.
And that was, of course, we didn't buy Coca-Cola or anything like that, but we made root beer. You'd this 5-gallon crock and put sugar and extract, root beer extract.
Watkins extract.
And then had to sterilize the bottles and pour the mixture into the bottles and cap it. We had a capper, and then we'd store it down in the basement for so many days until it got carbonated, and then start putting it in the refrigerator, and that was pretty good stuff.
Every once in a while, a bottle would bust open because it's had too much yeast in it or something. Yeah.
One year she bottled tomato juice, and I don't know whether, of course I guess she cooked it and sterilized stuff, but it didn't, the things started exploding.
Neat. What are some things that you remember hearing other people tell you about your parents?
I got one
Go ahead.
insert here. You know, back in Prohibition, nobody, you wouldn't make liquor, or if you did, it'd be in the bathtub, that type of thing. But anyway, we couldn't get the wine for the communion service, because you couldn't buy wine. So my mother said, oh, I think I can make it. I don't know what happened, but we had fruit flies, like you wouldn't believe.
Oh, boy.
I think the next year she had a down pat where,
Yeah, we sit had a table in the kitchen, and then they had a counter, and she had all these crocks up there with the wine fermenting and the fruit flies.
So that wine was supposed to be exclusively used for communion, but every once in a while, I would go down there and take just a dram,
Mm-hmm.
you know, just a dram.
Medicinal purposes.
Medicinal purposes, right?
Dad quite often had some wine that had been given to him that he kept downstairs. And then Dad would bring home apples from the cold storage. He'd book 5 cases or something of
it used to come in a
delicious
barrel.
apples, and boy, we ate them.
Yeah.
And he'd bring them home, and we'd go down and
Frozen cherries.
Well, this is something that I remember about your mother, is she could make more apple dishes, desserts, applesauce. I guess that's why, if someone brought you 5 boxes of apples.
Yes. And during the Depression, even though we had very little money, my dad worked in the food business and always brought home food, which was nice. And finally, in good food like apples and frozen cherries from the cold storage division of the company. But I remember my dad, as far as entertainment is concerned, he loved to walk, and he would take us boys down. I remember taking us down along Minnesota river bottoms, and just walking with us. We weren't saying much, and that was a Robert Bly kind of thing. And
we'd investigate all the things along the riverbank and
right, snapping turtles and coons up in the hole in the tree, and Aunt Amanda, mother's sister, one time came to me, and I don't know if any of you or us are around, and she, her sons had no father because he had committed suicide, and I remember she telling me, you boys don't know how lucky you are.
She was right.
To have a father who would take time out and walk us, and
we'd walk
spend
up-
time with us.
Sunday afternoon, we'd walk up to Lake Harriet or go down to the river bottom and
Or go out on the ice when it was frozen and, with ice boats, and I remember I have movies of him out there, and he used to love to ham it up and make faces in front of the,
He did, didn't he?
you remember
I've seen
that?
the movies, yeah.
Yeah,
well, those real cold winters about 1936, and the ice got so thick on Lake Minnetonka that when we go out to Aunt Amanda's, he'd take the car out on the ice, and we'd ski jor, go to get a rope behind the car and ski. But the ice was about 3 foot thick. And
And then what changed when he got down here, when they got down here?
But he stayed active with that little 30 acres there and other things he had to do.
he said it added 10 years to his life.
To get out of
To
Minnesota or
to get away from the very strong union. The strong unions there were always, pushing for higher wages, and he was paying higher than they were asking, and they still struck one time, and he was having a lot of worries about his health and labor unions, and then also the weather. He really liked the milder climate. And he said it added 10 or 20 to his life.
Moved again, I'd move further south.
Well, another thing too, we were on a rather busy streetcar line, and the streetcars were iron wheels on iron track.
Yeah.
It made a squeaking
Squeaking.
noise.
Clanking.
Yeah, you felt like taking a shot at it. Well, that was one of the big reasons to move to Emerson Avenue. That was.
I didn't see why that bothered Dad, but I can understand now.
Well, that's because they lived in they slept in the front bedroom.
Yeah. Do you remember having the pigeons?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you had a little porch on the south side of the house, and Tom could put his hand up, and the pigeon would fly down. But this one white pigeon, one time it just swooped in between the houses and out to the street and got run over by the streetcar.
Not very smart pigeon.
Mm,
How could a pigeon that was flying get run over by the streetcar?
Low IQ.
yeah, hey.
And then we had dogs, and they'd get distemper and die. And
Well, one question you asked, John, was, about the emotional life of my folks. We already mentioned a little bit about mother, but my dad seemed always to be in a good mood and never met a stranger. And I often, to this day, I would ask, what would Dad do? Just as far as meeting people and learning how to relate to them. I got a lot from my dad that way, and he was a very congenial man, and you also asked about what other people thought about him. He had very high regard. Business people in Minneapolis talked about Scotty. That was his nickname, and he always had a jovial attitude, and even had some serious times, but he was always well met. He was a well-met person.
The church was obviously important to them.
oh yeah,
When they got here, did they find an assembly or start an assembly?
there was a little group meeting here. They had their own building. They really didn't own it. Another person had paid for it, but it was in his name rather than the church's name. And
Are you talking about? Were you asking about Minneapolis?
He's asking about here.
Here.
Here, okay.
And so Dad arranged for the corporation papers, and the property was put in the hands of the corporation, and then it started doing some things, and work grew. But Dad had a real good. He wasn't just, you might say, local. He got with some of the fellows that were involved in the Blue Ridge Bible Conference and other things, and worked with them, and they regarded him very highly too.
Now, one thing I remember about the long walks is he seemed to know a lot of people who lived out in the remote areas because of the church. Either he knew them or he just made friends with them immediately, because I remember him taking us up in a car and just stopping at houses at random, and we'd go in and meet everybody inside, and I just assumed that was part of his church, or he was encouraging people to get into the church. But it looked like he was very active with a lot of different people.
Well, he took an interest in a lot of people. Several I don't know how long ago it was, I went down to Augusta to a conference, and I went into the restroom, and this was about 30 years after Dad had died, and I just forget the guy's name right now, but we were washing up, and he said, "I remember something your dad told me."
Yeah.
That's a lasting impression you made on somebody.
Yeah.
And your mom was more quiet,
Yes.
but she was active in the church too?
Very active, yeah.
Very active with the women at church. Yeah. She'd have these quilting parties.
And the women's prayer group,
Yeah. And she would also be caring for people that she knew were coming in. For example, I remember Stella Workman, I think is her name, in Minneapolis, who came from Hinckley, and she came to Minneapolis, and my mother kind of took her under her wing. And I remember her taking Stella upstairs. I think she slept in one of our bedrooms, and Stella didn't even know what the commode was. And my mother had to teach her how to flush the toilet and what it was all about. And so she befriended people like Stella, and was
well, they took in a lot of people. We
Yeah.
Ada Parker living with us for a
Yeah.
while, and Connie Hansen, and
yeah,
and people that were, they just didn't have their life put together. Folks were real patient with them.
or they were not intellectually sharp. Yeah,
The other thing is your dad had a commitment to helping guys who were just getting out of prison, getting out of jail.
I don't think
I
he
think
was.
that was more Asheville, at least I got involved with
Yeah.
it more.
well, that's what he
That
meant.
happened that happened once he was here in
Yeah.
Asheville.
Bud Williams.
And was that a short-term thing, or did it go on for?
If there-
Quite a few
if
men,
there
or-
was they'd send them to another camp. I think this top two floors of the municipal building downtown. Still got bars in the window.
Hmm.
I don't think they use it as a jail anymore,
But he agreed to hire men who'd just been released.
but, yeah.
Remember Junior, wasn't it Junior and his wife and child? And one of us helped build that little building up behind the barn so they could live there. Yes, my dad did that. I think more than once.
Then he had,
The ladies' sewing circle, I was just a little kid, probably about 4 years old. And I was out on Nicollet Avenue, which is in front of the house, and I threw a rock or something. And there was a Packard automobile going by, and the guy slammed on the brakes and came back, and I was gonna get out of there. I went in and went underneath where the ladies were making a quilt. Not too smart, but
that was like a plate glass window.
Yeah, he wouldn't dare look under the quilt.
I often think how stupid could you be? But,
Well, we used to throw snowballs.
you know, I
That
think
we
that's
thought-
where I kinda got the,
Yeah. Throw snowballs at cars.
We could
A
throw
little
a lot
different
of
with a
other
rock.
things. I remember throwing green plums at some of the cars.
This is off the record.
Off the record.
One of them, the guy had his elbow out the window, and I think it hit his crazy bone. Boy, he chased us all over the neighborhood.
you didn't have a chance, we
Well, I haven't asked you about cars. I know that's a trivial thing, but what cars do you remember your family having?
Well, they had that. Dad had a Model T when they first got married, and then they had the Essex that I remember, and then they had a Auburn. Well, that Dad broke his leg, and they had that Auburn at the time that and Mother learned to drive that thing. She hadn't been driving, but she learned to drive.
That was a fancy car.
Yeah, it was a blue, and it had the tire mounted on the fender, and it was quite a car.
Couldn't close the garage door because it was too long.
And then
Too long, yeah, for the garage.
Well,
Then we had a
well, I
Buick,
guess- Go ahead.
Buick with a thermometer where you opened up the radiator, a thermometer sticking up there to tell you, because they didn't have antifreeze back then, that they just had alcohol. And
Well, I
the
thought-
alcohol would boil
I
out.
think I got my order wrong when we had the Essex, and then I think Dad got that Buick. It
Well-
had a cracked block or something. He got it very reasonably, and it was a serviceable car. I was thinking about today, we got all these spoke wheels now,
Right.
and, but that had wood spokes.
Wow.
And we made a trip to Canada in that car, and
To Canada.
to eastern Ontario to see his sister, and then I think we got the Cord, the Auburn, which was related to the Cord, and then the first new car we had that I remember was the '34 Chevrolet. And,
Well, we got a 1932 Ford, I think, didn't we?
I don't remember that.
At any rate, the 1934 Chevy was new.
Yeah.
It
That
had,
that was the first new one. It was gray, and it had some red stripe trim.
and it had knee action.
That's right.
Knee action, and they had the first ventilator window right on the
No
front.
draft ventilation.
No draft ventilation. That was a real innovation.
Then I think we had a series of Plymouths, and,
Yeah.
and then got the Dodges.
Just always sedans.
For 4 kids, yeah.
And extras. We had a preacher that wore a wig, and of course he's sitting up in front with Dad, and you or Tom, said, Mr. Watt, how come you don't get your hair cut?
And he made some kind of diplomatic answer, even though he was pretty peeved, I think. The wig didn't sit right. It kind of stuck out in back. And we thought we were gonna, he thought we had come into his bedroom and had disturbed some of his papers, because he was writing books and all that. And so we decided we'd fix him up. And we wrote about 25 or 30, took 25, 30 sheets of paper and said something like this: "Here is your paper, Mr. Watts." And all over the whole bedroom there was just these papers. And he came in and he thought that we had scattered everything. And the first look, he opened the door, here were all these papers, and he was really upset until he started reading.
One other, did you do Alf Gibbs with a ink blot? Put ink blot on some of his manuscript or something?
I don't remember. Well, we had a lot, my parents entertained preachers very much, and we had no local minister, and all of the preachers that came by were itinerant preachers, like the Methodists, what do they call them, the circuit riders, yeah. And these preachers would come around, and my folks would almost always entertain them. And so boys had an experience, of seeing that kind of hospitality. My mother was very good for that. Did a lot of work taking, entertaining.
Some of them were try your patience. One of them, he always wanted to listen to a certain commentator on the radio from Des Moines, H.R. Gross, and we'd be wanting to listen to Tom Mix, and you ought to turn off that trash. And so when he wanted to listen to H.R. Gross, guys would go downstairs in the fruit cellar and wiggle the light bulb and cause all sorts of static, and he couldn't understand why Gross's program always had such bad static.
And my folks were very anxious for us not to be exposed to things of the world. And one of the programs that they loved very much was FBI. What was the name of that show? Anyway, it had to do with the FBI. And they always sent us up to bed. Gangbusters, something like that. Anyway, they always sent us up to bed, and then they would turn on the FBI show with the radio, and we would line up upstairs. There was a railing, and we'd line upstairs and listen the best we could to Gangbusters. Anyway, they didn't realize that they were really warping our personalities.
And did your father ever retire? I mean, really, did he ever stop working?
Yeah, he sold the chicken houses, and he didn't really have a, about the time he sold the property there, he wasn't doing anything outside. Then he moved down to Vanderbilt Apartments.
After my mother died.
After Mother had the stroke.
I'm sorry, after the stroke. And some of the most emotional words I ever heard my dad say was, when moving out, he was leaving this home where, you know, he lived with his wife all these years, and he looked at me and said about moving the furniture, he said, "This is the hardest thing I have ever done." Just, I mean, he's essentially was saying, "I'm going down there to die." This is what he was saying to me. It was, "I'm going down there to die." And he never did. He never was himself. We thought sure he'd meet some people in the hallway and things like that.
Well,
but
he left his door open and tried, but that wasn't a very conducive place to meet people.
But he wasn't happy there. Yeah.
That was in the early to mid-70s, and that was just not a time when people were likely to stop in and visit. I think times had changed an awful lot by then.
Yeah.
It was harder for someone just to meet people and be friendly.
Well,
And then your mom had the type of stroke that allowed her to hear and understand but not to speak. And she was
Well,
paralyzed on.
yeah. We didn't know how much she understood, but
Okay.
there were times when she was more lucid than others.
I sent tapes down, and Mrs. Gaddis, the lady that took care of Mom, she would say, she plays those tapes, I get tired of hearing. But that was one thing, she could turn the
I gotta put a new battery in this thing.
She had use of one arm, one half of her body, more or less. She could move, she could grasp things and
What
hold.
really got me, I was working in Pennsylvania at the time. I came
I'll be
down on a
back.
Saturday morning. He said, Mrs. Gaddis said, "Your mom's not eating, we gotta do something with her." I said, so I went in and, "What's this I hear about you not eating?" She looked up at me and pointed.
Yeah.
She wanted to go home and be with the Lord. Boy, that was tough.
Yep.
When she had the stroke, I remember my dad, we all came up to her hospital room, and my dad picked up her hand and talked about all the years of work that those hands had done.
Yep.
And he was not often emotionally showed a lot of affection, but he really did then. He really talked about this woman as a real partner in his life, and I just never heard him talk like that before. That's very touching.
If we had a few brains that we used, we should have hired Mrs. Jamerson or somebody to come in and clean and make a meal for Dad. And then
Yeah,
he could play around with the cattle when he wanted
Yeah.
to.
but even the last year though, he wanted to start a garden. He'd get the garden plowed and he would go down to the garden and then he would come back and he said, I just can't do this anymore. It wasn't that he couldn't move his hands or his body, it's just that there was something. So he and the guy were out in, the guy who owned the hardware shop or something, or they used to sit, he was about Dad's age, and they both used to sit on a log or something like that and just chat like old duffers do. And I overheard him one time talking about women. And they were just talking about how beautiful they still were, but they just didn't move them at all like it did when they were younger. It was kind of a neat idea. You know, my dad was always so, careful about what he said in front of us, and all. But here he was, just kind of disclosing a little bit. He sure liked beautiful women like all of us do. He was a very human person, and toward the end, I encouraged him to drink a little wine. Just drink a little wine, not much at all, but just to break over once in a while and have a little wine. And he did, and he really enjoyed just that kind of very, in the evening or whatever, to take a little sip of wine. And in his earlier days, he was a real drunk. And so he was very reluctant to get into that, but I was just pleased that he was willing to break over and nothing in excess, but he really enjoyed a glass of wine toward the end.
And he eventually passed away. And what was it? Was it a heart ailment? Was it cancer?
Cancer of the kidneys.
No.
He was in the VA hospital, wasn't he? Isn't that where he had?
I don't remember what VA hospital he may have been, but he was at the one near where Jack lived, Auburn Hospital. Well, it was a local Asheville hospital that he went to and was operated on. So Mother had a stroke, but my father died earlier. And I remember Mother sitting in the car looking at my dad's gravestone. I still have a picture of that. So she outlived him, but she had been pretty much out of it for several years.
Was there anything else that, thinking of your respective children and grandchildren, that you think might surprise them to know about your parents? Bearing in mind, for most people, the only thing they know about their great-grandparents are a picture on the wall, and that's about it.
Again, you look back in hindsight's 20/20. I felt I should have done something. I had the type of work I could probably leave my company for a year. When come back. We had two cousins that very much affected our life too. Dave and Jay Walden. And when you include the Innes family, you're going to get some Waldens in there somewhere. That they were really.
Well, Dad was kind of like a surrogate father.
He was a surrogate father.
If it's not hot,
And so they were like our older brothers.
we made some, we didn't even use it. Good deal.
I remember my dad was
Did you want the grape?
very close to Jay, who was a younger nephew.
Jack just did something.
And Jay worked for A&P.
Brokerage.
And I remember them out at Lake Minnetonka where Jay lived and with his mother. And my dad was helping him get over a depression. And he said, what you need to do is to put, when you're in a warm bed and you don't want to get up, you don't want to face the world, you get up and put one bare foot on the cold floor. And then you get up and put the other bare foot on the cold floor, and you go from there. A very, very, wise kind of thing, that, getting kind of shocked with the reality that there are things to do and places to go. I remember him saying that. And I told Jay one of the last times I ever saw him, I said, Jay, you know that you and I had the same father in this sense that he raised me and he raised you. And Jay, said, yeah, that's right. So there was a close relationship between Aunt Amanda's boys and us and my parents.
Well, Aunt Amanda was, I think, Mother's favorite sister. She liked Hulda and Freddie too, but she had more to do with them because they lived together at 4118. And then Amanda used to come over to visit Grandma, and she'd sew and help Mother with, I remember her taking, you might say, our old jackets and making mittens out of the old jackets. And then she did a lot of mending for Mother, because Mother had her hands full.
And Jay lived for a while with us, didn't he?
Yes, in 36, Amanda had her knee operation, and they had to come in they were living out at the lake then, and they came in and lived with us for a while. And then over at 46, 45, Amanda lived up in that third floor.
I have that table and chairs that belong to Aunt Amanda, that's over 100 years old.
Wow.
Yeah,
I
but we,
took the veneer off and put Formica.
I have 4 table legs that my grandfather made. I never met him, but it's just kind of a swirl like that, and they're about this tall. Now I just have them, and I just
that may be part of that old library table,
could be.
because it had an end and it had a spiral on on the 4 corners of the pedestal.
Well, I'll go into the workshop, my workshop, and I have those, they've just stacked up there, and I look at them, and I really got, I'm glad nobody looked at me or could see me, because I just brought those down and I felt those legs, and I talked to my grandfather. There was a connection there. I never knew him, but he handled that and I handled that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty important to me.
And that's your grandfather?
Grandfather Lilligren. Yeah, grandfather in Scotland, no, it's never, he was never here.
Alexander?
Yeah, Alexander.
Well, Uncle Jack, the last question I was gonna ask is, what's something that might surprise your children or grandchildren if they knew it about your folks? Something unexpected.
Breaking the Packard window.
Breaking the Packard window.
It was on when I threw the rock, I broke the back window in
Yeah.
a Packard.
Well, of course, when you're growing up, you never think you're gonna move. And I was surprised when they made the move to 46, 45 Emerson. But that was a good move.
It was a beautiful home.
Well, I can't think of anything, but
What did you say that home, that Dad bought that home for?
$5,000, and he was angry about it. He wanted
It's probably,
Oscar Anderson,
probably 300,000.
a million now. Dexter said it was $1 million now. I don't remember anything
In a
spectacular.
very good neighborhood, and, you know, congressman lived down the street from us, and jeweler next door.
Judge across the street? Judge Sullivan?
Well,
I don't remember anything spectacular that you asked, like about surprise.
It doesn't have to be, but just something that unexpected that you might never guess from looking at their picture or
Well-
hearing what they did.
When we are driving home, I will think about three things.
I can't particularly think of anything.
Well, we must have covered everything then.
It's been
Thank you.
interesting. We probably didn't get everything, but you got a lot anyway. I got those printouts downstairs, John.
Okay.
February 2nd, 2009. We're enjoying a nice little snowfall. More than likely a shower, although 4 or 5 days ago they predicted that it would be 4 or 5 inch snow. And that would have pleased me. That would have pleased me because there's a tractor over there that I would love to use to clean the driveway. It's a pretty contrast. Our great oak.